Hello.
Welcome, everyone. My name is Professor Robin Mason. I'm the Pro-Vice Chancellor International at the University of Birmingham, and I'm really delighted to welcome you to this Strengthening Birmingham in Hong Kong online event. Wherever in the world that you happen to be, it's a real pleasure to have you join us. I'm just going to say a few words of introduction to the event and then hand over to much better qualified people than I am to talk about how Birmingham is engaging and hopes to engage further in Hong Kong. Before I do, let me just run through a little bit of Zoom etiquette. I know we're all experts by this stage, but just a reminder that we are recording this webinar. So if you are asked to click to continue, please do so that we can capture the recording and any questions and answers. On questions and answers, please do vote early, vote often, as it were. Give us lots of questions for all the speakers. You can do that via the Q&A box, and we'll do our very best towards the end of the webinar to answer as many of them as we can. All cameras and mics will be disabled during the webinar, although if we call on you to put your question to the panel, by magic your mic will be turned on at that point. But even though the mics will be muted during the talks, please feel free to use the chat function throughout the webinar. So what we have for you today is a really great lineup of speakers. In a moment, I'm going to be handing over to Dr. Conrad Wang, who's chair of the Hong Kong Foundation. And then after him, Professor Geoffrey Ma, honorary president of the Hong Kong Foundation, will both say a few words of welcome. And then we'll hand over to our academic speakers. As I say, I'm the Pro-Vice Chancellor at the University of Birmingham. I sit on the university executive with responsibility for our international and global engagement strategy. And I also sit on the board of directors of the foundation as a university member, alongside my colleagues, who I'm sure many of you know, Craig, Gavin and Vicky, from our Development and Alumni Relations Office. I'd like to take this opportunity to say a huge thanks to the Foundation's founding donors for your support, for your guidance, and of course for your generosity in helping us to get the Foundation off the ground. It's been a work of persistence. It's taken us a while. We haven't been helped, of course, by the ongoing pandemic situation, but through real persistence and commitment, it's fabulous that we've now got the Foundation up and running, and you'll hear of some of its impact already during today's webinar. I'd also like especially to thank Geoffrey Ma for giving the board your wisdom and guidance, Geoffrey, as the Foundation's first honorary president. And I know that you, Conrad, Guy, Wendy and Anna will take the Foundation from strength to strength as its first alumni board members. Well, I've referred already to our speakers, and I'm really pleased to say that we'll be joined today by Professor Lisa Webley, who's the Chair in Legal Education and Research and the head of the Birmingham Law School. Professor Deborah Udall, head of the School of Education, and Professor of the Sociology of Education. Professor Isolde Lynch, Professor of Environmental Nanosciences, and Professor Stefan Krause, Professor of Ecohydrology and Biogeochemistry. And each of our 4 speakers will give an overview of the work that the Foundation's generous donors are already helping to accelerate in Hong Kong, driving partnerships and collaboration between Birmingham and Hong Kong. And as I say, there'll be a chance for questions at the end. So we'll hear from Conrad, Jeffrey, our 4 speakers, and then we'll have questions and answers at the end. So with that, I'm delighted to hand over to Dr. Conrad Wang. Conrad, over to you to say a few words.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depends on where you are. As the chairman of the foundation, I'm very delighted to be here and more delighted to see you in this particular Zoom meeting. I hope in the future, not too late, that we can actually all meet in person, but I think that's what we can do so far. I'm also should really say big thanks for all the donation that we have received for the foundations. And in last December, the committee, we have the board, we have our meeting together with Wendy, Guy, and Anna. We have quite a lengthy discussion, I must say, because the university have tabled us 5 projects. And after a very detailed discussion, debated, we at the end of the day have chosen 3. And we are very happy. We have got these 3 projects on hand now. And I'm sure this really good work will benefit both the university and Hong Kong community. I know that Jeffrey is here. He is our first honorary president, which we need to introduce him to the Hong Kong audience. He is the former Chief Justice of Hong Kong, really serving the great community in the really highest possible legal ethical standard. We all basically indebted for him because Hong Kong, we are based on our very sound judicial system. And he was very helpful and pleasant with our meeting. We'll have a lot of discussion with him and tap in this wisdom and guidance. So without further ado, can I pass it to you, Jeffrey?
Yes. Thank you very much, Conrad. And a warm welcome from me too, to all attending this event. I would also like to add my gratitude to all our generous donors to the foundation. It is an immense honor and privilege for me to be a part of the foundation and try to help guide the foundation in its infancy. I look forward to attending the next board meeting to see where we go next and what we can do and what we can fund next. Since I started reading law this is 1974, I've always retained a deep affection for Birmingham University, and I'm pleased that I can now be of some assistance to our university to help it be of relevance and to make an impact here in Hong Kong and in the mainland. This has always been the strength of the university, to be relevant in the community in which we live. I'm also humbled that there are scholarships in my name. The board has chosen to fund 3 scholarships this year, all current students from Hong Kong entering their 2nd or 3rd year in Birmingham Law School. Next year, we'll begin a new cycle of awarding Geoffrey Ma scholarships to students from Hong Kong in all subject areas, not just law, in their 1st year of study to help attract the brightest and best minds to Birmingham. This will broaden the support available from the program, opening it up to all students from Hong Kong in all disciplines. I'm looking forward greatly to hearing from Professor Lisa Webley about the first cohort of awardees of the scholarships and from the other project leads whose pioneering research will benefit from your generosity to ultimately benefit the community to which we all belong. I've no doubt that you will be inspired by what you hear tonight, and I'd like now to introduce our first speaker, a person I much admire, Professor Lisa Webley.
Thank you. Thank you very much for that very generous introduction as well, Jeffrey. I'm utterly delighted that in this first year, it has been possible for the Foundation to effectively award prizes to 3 of our existing students in the law school. When we move into this next academic cycle, your generous donations will be used as scholarships for incoming students to attract the brightest and best students from Hong Kong to join us at the University of Birmingham in a whole range of disciplines. We've had a very rigorous process to identify the highest performing students with the most potential, not just in the context of their studies here at the University of Birmingham in the law school, but also in terms of the contribution we hope and they hope they will make back in Hong Kong when they return following their graduation. The students have been asked to provide, obviously, their assessment results to date, so that we can ensure that the rigour of their academic credentials, details of their work experience at any scholarships or awards they already hold, their intentions in the context of working in Hong Kong after graduation, and also to outline how your generous donations will further their career ambitions in the context of them being awarded a prize this year. In future years, it will be a scholarship. I'm delighted that all 3 of our Geoffrey Ma Law Prize holders are with us today and are on this call. We have made awards to Calvin Chen, who is a first-year law student with us. He's to date achieved a very strong first-class degree attainment. He's born and raised in Hong Kong. He studied at St Paul's College until year 11 before he moved on to Education First International Law Campus in Cambridge to do a foundation degree, came top in his class at St Paul's, achieved excellent grades, joined us and has already made a contribution through the university. He's the incoming president of the Birmingham Hong Kong Public Affairs and Social Services Society. He's worked as a legal intern at the Conyers and participated in a virtual legal experience program with RPC. COVID has obviously changed the way in which our students are able to engage with law firms, with courts, with pro bono work. He's also assisted Mr. Martin Wall, barrister at law, and been a mini pupillage in Parkside Chambers, and he hopes to become a solicitor on graduating back in Hong Kong. He's asked me to pass on his thanks to the very generous donors, and says he's sincerely honoured to have been selected as a recipient of the Geoffrey Ma Prize. Thank you for the University of Birmingham Hong Kong Foundation's generosity and immense support, which has allowed him to unleash his potential in law with this financial subsidy. He's deeply grateful and looks forward to going on with his academic career and then on into practice in Hong Kong. Our second awardee is Leah Ho, who is in her second year of study with us. She's achieved consistently high results in all of her previous semesters with us. And before Birmingham, she graduated from St Stephen's Girls' College in Hong Kong, which will be known to some of you. Leah's been very active also in the Hong Kong Public Affairs and Social Services Society. She's been their administrative officer, and she's organised a whole range of events. She's also been selected to write a biography for a female African judge for the Institute for African Women in Law, and has been admitted to join the Student Lawyer, Future Lawyer briefing team. Already has positions of responsibility within the training cadre of the legal profession. She's been involved in various volunteering activities, including the Imperial College Hong Kong Pass Famine 24 event for World Vision UK, and also the Amazing Race 2022 Homelessness under COVID-19 for Crisis UK. She's interned already extensively, including at King and Wood Melson's in Hong Kong as a temporary clerk, and also has secured a vacation clerkship for the summer this year as well. And upon having been told that she would be a recipient of a Geoffrey Marr Law Prize, she has said, "I'm sincerely honoured to have been selected as one of the recipients of the Geoffrey Marr Law Prizes. Thank you for your generosity, which has encouraged me to continue to strive for excellence academically in my final year. I will surely work hard to become a lawyer and to contribute to the Hong Kong community in the very near future." Our final Law Prize winner is Florence Chung, who is also in her second year. She studied at Sacred Heart Canossian School and Sacred Heart Canossian College. She aspires to work as a solicitor or in legal related fields in Hong Kong. When she was at high school, she participated in a job shadowing programme organised in partnership with a local law firm, Angela Ho and Associates, and she had the opportunity to observe the Hong Kong justice system when she visited the High Court. This has led her to want to undertake pro bono legal work, and she has been selected by the law school to join our pro bono group so that she is able to provide free advice, assistance and support to those in need, something that we are very committed to in the law school. She's currently president of the Hong Kong Public Affairs and Social Services Society, and so is heavily involved in organising various activities, particularly in the context of this year's first years from Hong Kong, from across the university, to help those from Hong Kong to adapt to studying in the UK and settling into university. And she's asked me to pass on her very great thanks and to say that she'd like to take this opportunity to express her gratitude to the board and donors for giving the scholarship to her. It truly means a lot to her and her family, and she says she will definitely make good use of this and give back to society. Thank you. I've got no doubt that these prize recipients will make a really important contribution when they return to Hong Kong, just as they are already doing here within the university community. We look forward to sharing their progress with you, hopefully in Hong Kong, when we're all able to travel again, so that everyone is able to meet those who have been so generously supported by the foundation. Thank you very much on behalf of the law school and on behalf of our students. Without your help, we wouldn't be able to give these opportunities to those in our community. Thank you. I'm now going to pass over to Professor Deborah Udall, who's going to tell you a little bit more about how you have supported those in the university. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Hello, everybody. It's really lovely to be here, and I'm so excited about the research study that the foundation has supported this year. I want to tell you a bit about the team that we're going to work with, and a bit about what we're going to do and why I think it's such an important piece of work. So the project that we're going to undertake is called the Social, Pedagogic and Biochemical Influences on Learning to Learn. People in Hong Kong, I think, will be quite familiar with the idea of learning to learn and the central push and attention on thinking about how children learn how to learn and how that supports their development and their success in education. And I'm sure people are familiar with the notions of pedagogy and the social influences on learning. The idea that there might also be biochemical influences on learning. Perhaps I wish I could see everybody on the call's face, because on the one hand, it's quite an unusual, it's a completely unusual suggestion to make in education circles. And yet I think that kind of as humans that live in the world, it makes an awful lot of sense to us. And it seems obvious that what happens in our bodies is going to be involved in what happens to us in classrooms and what happens when we start to learn. So in a sense, what this work is doing is going to put the science or start to put the science into what ought to really have been obvious to us all along. So we have a team in the UK. Just say a little bit about myself. I'm actually, as Robin said, I'm a sociologist of education. My work has all been concerned with educational equity and how we make a difference for children, young people, and for society through education. It's all of that work has been underpinned by analyses of the social, of cultural, of pedagogy, curriculum, policy. And that's what I've been known for until about 2015-16, when the British Academy gave me a fellowship to do some work developing biosocial approaches in education. And what that involved me in doing was trying to very quickly catch up with a whole range of areas of emergent science and neuroscience and biochemistry, epigenetics. Obviously, I remain a sociologist and my expertise in those areas remains quite limited, although much better than it was 5 years ago. What I've done is make connections with a range of experts in those areas so that we can work collaboratively and bring all of our expertise together. So we have a team in the UK, and in response to the invitation to apply to the foundation, I approached my colleagues at the Education University of Hong Kong, who I've worked with over the years, in particular Professor Sue Saltmarsh, who I worked with in Australia about 20 years ago. She's always been a very creative education thinker. And so I said to her, "Hey, Sue, would you like to do some of this with me?" She was delighted, and she's involved Dr. Catherine Mamade and Dr. King Chung from the Education University Hong Kong to work with us on this as well. So part of what the project will do is engage people based in Hong Kong, education researchers in Hong Kong, in this biosocial thinking, which I think is absolutely going to transform the way that we think about what happens in classrooms, and I think for the better. So I think probably people will have been watching as governments and the general public have got more and more interested in things like neuroscience and genetics and epigenetics. There has been less engagement with those issues in education. And I felt that there was a real challenge for educationists to engage and really understand what are the implications for education of those developments. There are a range of ways in which we might do that. And that I have a book called Biosocial Education, which I wrote with human biologist Martin Linley. And in that, we set out a range of things that a biosocial engagement in education might pursue. Brain-to-brain synchrony, nutrition, the impact of sleep on the body. In this project, we're focusing in particular on feeling and learning, and how understanding the biochemistry of the body and its emotional or affective encounters in the classroom might help us to understand learning better. So in education to date, most of the work around feeling has been observational, self-reports, observation. There's a very rich theme of work in education that uses arts-based methods to try and engage with and surface the feelings of students in classrooms as they engage with one another, as they learn. That work often talks about affect, and the idea of affect being the experience of the body before we start necessarily to put the names of feelings or emotions onto them. But again, observation and art. So what we're doing that's so radically different in education scholarship is to step outside the confines of education and its usual methods, bring with us the good methods and understandings around pedagogy and classroom relationships and encounters that education offers. But to add to that, disciplinary expertise from the human sciences, and in particular from biochemistry, and bring that into the classroom to work alongside education techniques. So specifically, we're using, and for scientists, this might make absolute sense and be obvious. For me, it was a fabulous new discovery 5 years ago. We're going to use the analysis of volatile organic compounds, or VOCs, in exhaled breath, and in the exhaled breath of children and teachers, and in the classroom atmosphere. And we're going to use those to identify the biochemical processes in the bodies of people in classrooms. So trying to ask, what are children's metabolic responses in learning environments, and how might they relate to children's successes or otherwise in classrooms? So we have, there are some really interesting prior studies in cinema, auditorium, where the atmospheric volatile organic compounds have been analysed against closely monitored, time-stamped and coded films of different sorts. And that's proved very successful and has identified a range of chemicals. So we start to have a panel of biochemicals that we can attach to particular sorts of effective responses. There's also been some interesting work using VOC analysis in test situations, and in particular test situations with different sorts of levels of stress associated with them. And perhaps unsurprisingly, stress has been one of the emotions or effective responses that has been particularly paid attention to. We are just as interested, or actually I personally am more interested, in children's experiences of pleasure, of joy, of the sorts of very good, the good feelings that might flow in classrooms that help children learn and support learning. And we hope that we will start to get to the possibility of some mechanism. We will nest the work with VOCs in really close, careful classroom observation, so that we can understand very precisely what's happening in the classroom and what the child is doing in the period directly before the samples are taken. So,
well, Deborah, just the 1 minute warning for you.
Thank you so much. So we're going to do this work in schools in the from September up to the end of the year. We anticipate that by the 3rd, 4th month of 2003, we'll be in a programme of sharing that research with teachers in both Hong Kong and in the UK, engaging in teacher professional development activities and conferences. We think this insight could really change the way that teachers and education systems think about encounters in classrooms and the significance of how it feels to be there and how it feels to learn. And on the back of this work, I think that we have a really, really strong set of pilot data to be going to for major funding, and of course the two teams will be able to take that forward. So the benefits for the UK and Hong Kong, I think, could be really tremendous. Thanks for the warning, Robin. You can tell that I could talk about that research for hours. And hopefully we'll get another chance in the as it develops to share findings and show people equipment and how we've actually done that in classrooms. So I'm going to hand over now to Isel and Stefan, who are going to talk about their work.
Thank you, Deborah. That was absolutely fascinating. And I'm sure Stefan also has lots of ideas of how there might be some really nice intersections between your project and ours. And just to also note, for example, that other colleagues at the University of Birmingham have been looking at, for example, diesel exhaust emissions outside of schools and things, and how that correlates with learning and things. So, and also, of course, Peter Krafthel's work on plastic childhoods, which I think was looking similarly at, you know, lived experiences with plastics and things. So I think there might actually be another layer of integrating across some of these super projects that have been funded through the Hong Kong Foundation, and that give us all sorts of new opportunities to do things. I'm going to be a little naughty and a little academic and share my screen, and hopefully it works, because we are very scientific and we are very reliant on slides. But also, I think because what we're trying to show is maps basically, and sampling campaigns and things, we thought it might be nice just to give you a little bit of visual aid as well. So our project that we are thrilled to have had funded is looking for hot spots and hot moments of microplastic pollution, sampling in Hong Kong rivers and in the Pearl River Delta. So I'll explain briefly what hot spots and hot moments are, and the approach that we're going to take. So first up then, just what are microplastics and why do we care about them? So really, we're seeing them everywhere. They are the result really of mismanaged plastic waste, which is released into the environment. And we've probably heard about it much more in the context of oceans and seas and the plastic gyres and things. But actually, the source of the plastics is rivers. So rivers are the conduits of plastics into the ocean. And in actual fact, we're now discovering that vastly larger quantities of microplastics are actually entrained and entrapped in rivers. So understanding those patterns, where they accumulate, why they accumulate, and what we can do about it is really the goal of the work that Stefan and I have been doing over a number of years. So really just this Hong Kong Foundation funded project is extending things we've been doing within a larger Leverhulme Trust funded project called 100 Plastic Rivers, which really was an opportunity we had to make a baseline of the level of microplastics in different rivers around the world, using a very simple yet very harmonized approach to sampling. So in the literature, there are vastly different concentrations reported for microplastics. And that's partly because people were using different methods to sample. They were sampling different volumes of water. They were, using very different approaches. So it was impossible to compare, and the data were not like with like. So our project really was to develop a systematic way to at least get a baseline level. We know that it's only at that moment in time. We know that it doesn't tell us anything about the sources or anything about the fate of these microplastics, but at least it gives us a baseline to sort of see, are the more broad literature accurate, or where the discrepancies are arriving. This is really just a map of some of the sampling sites we have so far, and two of the important ones. Now we're going to have the addition of Hong Kong and the Pearl River Delta, which will be a huge addition. And the other major one we have is the Gengar, which I'll show you in a minute, in India. So in most places, they were just, the rivers were selected by the volunteers who took the samples, and they sampled where they chose themselves. So there wasn't really a purposeful design in terms of, is it upstream of a wastewater treatment? Is it downstream of an urban centre where most of the plastics will arise? So it really is a little bit hit and miss, except for the Gengar project, which I'll talk about, and now the Hong Kong project, where we can really get, ask some questions and have some hypotheses that we test. So basically this is, within the 100 Plastic Rivers project, we've developed some very detailed protocols of how we collect the samples. It's all very standardized. This was probably the last international trip Stefan and I took just before COVID began. So this was sampling in India along the Ganges River. And this was part of a major project that involved numerous universities and looking at multiple pollutants. And we sort of tagged our microplastics work on top of that. So overall then we've developed a fairly robust protocol for how we collect the samples, how we dry them, how we separate them, how we make sure that we can identify the plastics versus all of the other organic components in there. Then we stain our samples and then we can manually count, and we're now also working towards getting this step a little bit more automated. And we have fairly robust decision trees for how we rule out anything that's non-plastic. Then we have a quite laborious process then of identifying what the plastic is once we know that it is plastic. So I'm going to pass to Stefan to say a little bit about the Gengar Project, since he was the lead coordinator for that. Stefan, please.
Yeah, thank you very much, Isolde, and apologies for any potential background noise. I try to find the quietest spot in a large conference center where we're actually presenting some of this work today. And we thought we show you the results of the Ganga because it is another really large river, and in many aspects, the hotspots as well as some of the hot moments that we identified there for plastic pollution are things that we would really like to replicate with your support in the Pearl River Delta. So what you see on the map here on the right-hand side is that 84 locations that with 3 teams in more than a month's time, a lot of collaborators from India and multiple international organizations have been sampled just in the post-monsoon period of 2019. And the idea was to continue this sampling just before the monsoon hit again in 2020, but then of course the pandemic hit as well, and that work is still outstanding. But we learned a lot from that, and we spent the last 2 years analyzing this wealth of samples that has been unprecedented so far, and start to get really a first glimpse into what these hotspots are and what thanks Isolde for changing over. What our postdoc Holly Nell is just about to publish now, and relates to some work that we managed to publish earlier this year, is that we find some very distinct hotspots of microplastic pollution. These are basically all that circles along the river that are in yellow and in red. And some of that hotspots that you see there, some of them coincide with other contaminants, like what you see on that smaller maps. The top right is phosphorus, indicating some agricultural pollution. And then there's, something changed. There's supposed to be one that indicates wastewater input as well. And these are more solutes, these are not particulates. And we see that for this particulate pollution, the microplastics, we find very different hotspots, very different transport behavior, and in particular human interventions with obstructions of water, with damming rivers and the reservoirs that are receiving a huge amount of sediment that gets stored in that reservoirs as well, which is very similar to many large Asian rivers, show us which areas microplastics get accumulated over time. And we run some global models and that predict that we have several centuries of residence times of plastics in these rivers. We quantified, for instance, for the Mekong in Vietnam and the Ganga that you see here, that less than 3% of all the plastics that have entered that streams in the last 70 years since plastics have been used intensively around the world have exited the rivers towards the ocean. So the vast majority, as Isolde said in the beginning, is still sitting in the river sediments and is having impacts on us, on humans. And we would really like to explore with your support how that looks for the Pearl River Delta, because it is so diverse. And Isolde, if you could switch over, please. I guess you take over here again.
Yeah, perfect. So this is just a couple of maps to locate where we will plan to do our sampling. So here obviously is the Pearl River Delta, and then we have a number of rivers and sampling sites in Hong Kong. So this was from a recent paper that, that identified 26 rivers, 50 beaches, 9 bays, and 50 urban runoff sites. So this was by a colleague that we have recently identified as somebody who will collaborate with us in this project. So he's Dr. Yi Liu, who's an assistant professor of hydrogeology at the Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. So he has already been out to most of these sites. So we are now in the planning phase of what sort of transects we'll do, what distances, whether we'll sample up or down of the urban runoff sites, so that we can really begin to correlate sources with concentrations and where the microplastics are collecting. The goal with this is to sample. So in the Gengar, we had 1,000 samples. So here we're aiming to take about 5,000 samples. So it will be a huge amount of work, but it will really allow us to do both time resolved, so temporal, to get sort of the hot moments, or to see if concentrations in the rivers correlate with, for example, releases from wastewater treatment plants, or with releases from dams, or other activities like that. And then the hot spots is, correlating it with areas of high and low flow, for example, in the rivers, or if there's, areas where they are more urbanized and things. So we'll really then begin to understand where and why particles are collecting in certain ways. And that will then allow us to feed that information into both strategies to reduce those emissions, so to prevent further microplastics accumulating, but also then potentially to think about sites for remediation if there are particular locations that have large amounts of microplastics in the sediment. And of course that also relates to broader issues such as sand mining, which we know is a major another major environmental challenge in the region. So we might actually be able to leverage the fact that sand mining is going on if we can come up with clever solutions then to remediate. So that's really where we're at. We are absolutely thrilled to have the opportunity, and I just wanted to highlight one of our postdocs here at the University of Birmingham who will be deeply involved in the work, and then our colleague at HKUST, Hong Kong University of Science and Technology, who will be our local host. And yeah, if anybody has anyone with additional local knowledge has any suggestions in terms of sampling, or would like their, a river near them included, just let us know. We're happy to do that. And thank you again. We're so excited to have the opportunity, and we really look forward to presenting results to you in the next year or so. Thank you.
Udall, thank you very much, and thank you to all of our speakers. That's I do enjoy working in a university, because where else would you get such a range of absolutely fascinating topics that really matter? So thank you. I really enjoyed all of that. We now have an opportunity for Q&A, and actually, if I might, I wonder if I could turn first to Jeffrey, who I think might have a couple of questions for Lisa, or for any others. Jeffrey, over to you first.
Thank you very much, Robin. I do have a question for Lisa, and it's the question which I think anybody aspiring to read law or reading law wants to know. It's a question asked perennially. And it is this: to what extent do you think a Hong Kong student can benefit from gaining a law degree from the University of Birmingham before returning to Hong Kong? Well, I think mainly to practice, but can also include those who don't practice.
That's a really good question, and it is one that I'm sometimes asked by parents when they're sort of thinking through with their sons and daughters whether or not a law degree from an overseas jurisdiction, which obviously the UK, England and Wales is in this context, would be beneficial. I studied at the University of Birmingham too, and I studied English law and French law. And at the time, people said to me, "Why on earth would you study French law alongside English law?" And I actually think having a comparative understanding, to an extent, being able to see one's own legal system through the eyes of a different legal system, enriches one's understanding of one's own system. Now, obviously, there are huge commonalities between the law of England and Wales and the law of Hong Kong, as well as a lot of differences. The commonalities relate very much to the common law mode of reasoning, and that is transferable, which is why we have students from Singapore, we have students from Canada and many other jurisdictions that study with us. I think it also provides some of the historical underpinning of the legal system, because so many of the principles which will have over time changed in Hong Kong will have come through a particular route, and so it's useful to have that. I think also that the global network that our law students develop when they study with us makes a profound difference. A third of all of our undergraduate students are from overseas, mostly from other common law jurisdictions, but some from civil law jurisdictions as well. And that network is very enriching. So I think that makes a difference. But I also think there is a huge contribution made by our students from Hong Kong, because they question things that many of our home students just take for granted. They're studying in their home jurisdiction. It doesn't occur to them as unusual or to an extent very stereotyped, or law which seems to favour certain dominant groups over others. And so I think the critical analytical skills which are developed alongside the networks and alongside the opportunity to explore law in a variety of different contexts is really beneficial. We certainly benefit hugely from having students from Hong Kong. They are amongst the students that our staff, it's just so wonderful. We have these students with us, and I think it improves the discourse amongst our whole student population.
Lisa, thank you very much. Jeffrey, if it's all right, I'm going to move on to Anna, who I think has the next question. I think you might be muted, Anna.
Okay. Thanks, Robin. Now you can hear, right? I do have questions for Professor Deborah Udall. I think, first of all, Professor, thanks very much, for sharing your project on, it's quite a unique one, learning to learn, and then all these different inference, pedagogic and biochemical, etc. I think it will certainly creates impact to our next generation. So it's very influential, and I look forward to that. My question to that is, what are we going to do with the findings of this study? How are we going to share with the colleagues, at the University of Education in Hong Kong, to get the findings out and to enable our teachers to be able to make use of it to benefit our next generation?
Thank you. So we're planning as part of the program of work for the next year that we will we'll do a program of professional development activities for teachers, and we're still working through whether they will be face-to-face, hybrid. And I think what we'll do is a combination. So we'll do professional development activities for teachers in Hong Kong, face-to-face, but we'll also do some hybrid so that we can bring teachers from the two settings together to explore the findings. And I think what we want to get out of those is to engage educators in a conversation about what the implications of our findings might be for what they do in their classrooms, in their learning environments. So learning to learn has generally been really about enabling children to understand and reflect on their own learning. There's kind of a metacognition piece about it. How we feel is much less engaged with. And I think that one of the things that we have lost with a very strong focus on curriculum and a knowledge-rich curriculum is a focus on encounters, relationships, interaction. I think that what we'll be able to show, and of course we haven't shown it yet, so it's still speculative, but I think that what we'll be able to show is that the social and the pedagogic and the biochemical come together, and that as teachers understand that, it will actually, I think in some places, it will give them a mandate, give them the confidence to say how that child feels here is really important. It's not just what they produced, it's how they felt as well while they were doing this. And I think that gives us an opportunity to really revisit what happens in classrooms. So engaging teachers in those conversations is fundamental. I mean, I think part of our conversation will be with teachers will be, is this important? Is this important here? And I'm sure that the different classroom cultures of the UK and Hong Kong will, thinking across those, will be really productive as well for teachers. So we don't intend to have a set of instructions for teachers at the end. What we want to enable is a set of really, really rich conversations where educators work with us on what do we do practically different that responds to what we've found out.
I hope, the COVID situation next year would enable us to have more face-to-face interaction on this.
Yes, we hope so too. But what we've committed to is that if COVID doesn't let us be together, we will make use of these technologies, yes, which we're all much more used to now. We can make that work.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
And actually, thanks, Anna. And Deborah, just to follow up a little bit on what you were saying latterly, do you have any hypotheses yet as to differences that you might see in a Hong Kong study that you haven't seen, say, in a UK-based one, or is it too early to tell?
I think it's too early to tell, and so I don't know. I think what we'll see, I think that what we might see consistently is that where children feel secure and content and happy, we will see enhanced learning. Where children feel anxious or judged, then I think that we will see barriers to learning. Mm-hmm. It's likely that the sorts of environments and encounters that provoke those kind of effective responses will be different across settings, because those things will be shaped by cultural norms. So it'll be really interesting to see, what creates joyful learning in a Hong Kong classroom might not be what creates joyful learning in a UK classroom. I mean, maybe it's a hope. My hypothesis certainly is that joyfulness and learning will correlate, and it'd be lovely to be able to use some of the biochemistry to show that takes us past education professors asserting it.
Very good. No, very good. If ever you do develop a test that will allow me to know whether my daughter is revising properly, please do let me know. She's doing her exams right now, and I have my suspicions. Deborah, thank you. Let me turn now to Guy.
Hi, Robin, and thank you, Professor Lynch and Professor Krause, for sharing with us and telling us about your very important project. I first of all came across microplastic when when Greenpeace actually came to our company something like 5 to 6 years ago, and they told us that our products, they haven't done any tests on our products, but they know that a lot of beauty products have microplastic, and that was the first time we heard about microplastic, I regret to say, and it took us 2 years to get rid of the microplastic in our products, and to also communicate with other brands that we sell, at least those that we can have some influence at least, to tell them to stop including microplastic in their products, or otherwise we'll stop selling them. That was quite some time ago. But since I have read a lot about microplastics and the harm it can possibly bring, although as you've said, we're not too sure exactly how much and what, but certainly I read reports that that they are now present in our seafood, in all the seafood that we eat, and they are now present in our body, in human bodies too. And I also read and heard from you that they cause inflammation, and that may be a very important reason why we're getting more and more allergic to, more and more allergic, basically. So your project is very, very important to us, and I do wonder what you might expect to find in your projects in this part of the world, in our vicinity, versus the rest of the world, which you have covered a lot of, and also what we can do, based on the research findings, what we can do to help control this.
Super, thank you, Guy. Yeah, I think the microplastics that you mentioned in your products are those what we call the primary microplastics, so where they're intentionally added. And of course, both all over the world now, there's increasing emphasis on removing those ones. But I think the big challenge in the environment is, as Stefan mentioned as well, that we've been using plastic for 70 years. And a lot of that has been slowly, gradually breaking down into smaller and smaller pieces. And it's those ones that that are currently the problem and will continue to be the problem. And while the plastic itself might be relatively inert or not itself very toxic, the big problem, I think, and again, this will relate to some of Deborah's work, is the fact that we use so many other chemical additives in the plastic. So plasticizers and things, many of which have been found to be endocrine disrupting, for example. So will interfere with development and things. So, and then the other big challenge we have with plastics and with microplastics is that they absorb other chemicals. So things that might not have a direct route into our bodies can now be sorbed onto the microplastics and carried with them. So for example, if we have microplastics accumulating in sediments, and there are also other heavy metals or other pollutants that have accumulated over time from various industrial processes, it's maybe the combination of the plastics, the microplastics, giving those other pollutants a route into our bodies that they wouldn't have otherwise. And I think I mentioned the sand mining already, but also things like flooding, and anything that remobilizes those sediments and those particles that were buried, then redistributes them across the environment. So I think really, in terms of what we're expecting to see, Stefan, do you want to maybe take a punt at that based on the Gengar and the 100 Plastic Rivers data?
Yeah, and maybe with a short comment on the potential solutions as well, because while there's a lot of activity and has been over the last couple of years of cleaning up plastic, so basically focusing on macroplastics, and Isolde mentioned the gyres in the oceans, where we see even from satellites that there's a lot of macroplastic, large debris or bags and pieces of plastic accumulating. There's very energy intensive, and with that very expensive methods being rolled out to clean up the problem at the back end of the problem. We very strongly believe that is part of the solution, but maybe not the main part. So we really want to help to rather avoid that pollution to happen and rather tackle the front end of the problem where the problem occurs. And the data that we presented you from the Gengar were just the numbers of microplastic particles, but with the laboratories that we have available in Birmingham, this allows us also to really identify the polymer structure and all these additives that are entailed in this micro and nanoplastic particles. And we can basically place something like an environmental CSI and trace back what is the origin of this. Like, has this plastic particle that now is in a nano or micro scale, has it been broken down from a car tire? Has it been broken down from some plastic mulching in agriculture or from an old shopping bag? And so we can understand much better what are the main contributors to the main sources of plastic pollution and inform then legislators, a lot of the industry partners that we are working with, which are fantastic in getting involved from the chemical industries, manufacturing industries, agrochemical industries, but they need that element of evidence where what the fate and the transport basically of the plastic pollutants are that are emitted from their products, and that's what we hope to provide with projects like these.
Yes, it sounds like your project is not just going to be informative, but certainly will enable the legislators to actually do something about it, basically. So that's a very, very important project.
Exactly. Exactly. You know, and if we find a very clear correlation between, for example, wastewater treatment plants or things like that, then we could sort of say, well, okay, you know, let's put in an additional cleanup step before the effluent comes out. Or similarly, if the sludge component, if the microplastics are there in the sludge, and then that's re-spread on agricultural soils, that's just redistributing the problem. So again, you could say, well, okay, we've got it in this compact sludge now. Can we specifically treat the sludge before we then reuse it in agriculture, so that we're not just circulating the problem round and round? So and that's really where the hot spots and the hot moments come in, that if we know where those big fluxes are, we can then target the development of remediation strategies to those.
Thank you.
Could I ask also a question to Isolt and Stefan, which is there any role for citizen science in this sort of project?
Absolutely, yes. So in the 100 Plastic Rivers broadly, as part of the Birmingham in Action and Birmingham in Our Environment campaign, where we had lots of alumni focused activities, we did get lots of volunteers to collect samples for us. So the only caveat really is that we send the little sampling device, the filter and things, and the protocol, but it is very straightforward to do the sampling. So yes, it would be absolutely super to I don't know, perhaps even again, this is something where we could work with Deborah. So maybe with the school, that, you know, if you've already got a relationship with a school there, and we have our own Birmingham school, you know, perhaps there could be some crossover activities there as well, and see if that, you know, if getting involved in doing outdoor activities and projects is part of the joy of learning, for example. So yeah.
Very good.
But yes, absolutely. Citizen science, I think, is critical in all of the microplastic activity. And, you know, and a lot has been focused on beaches and beach cleanups, for example. But I think increasing our young people's understanding of the importance of rivers as the conduits of microplastics to the ocean, and as a major sink for microplastics, I think could be really, really useful.
Very good. Well, perhaps if you're on this call and you'd be interested in the project and you might be interested in being a citizen scientist, then please do get in touch. You can see that Emily's just posted a link to the Birmingham in Action campaign in the chat. We could go on, but we shouldn't. I'd just like to say a huge thanks to all of our panelists. I hope, I'm sure you'll have found that as stimulating as I did. So to all four speakers, thank you so much for explaining the projects, explaining the scholarships to us. We're all looking forward, I think, to the chance to meet face to face at some point. I'm certainly missing being in Hong Kong, so I'm looking forward to the time when that's going to be possible again. We'd really welcome your feedback on this event. As if by magic, Sarah's just posted something in the chat, which if you click on that link, you can give us your feedback. It's I've been promised that it's a very short survey, so it shouldn't take you too long to do. I'd just like to give my thanks to everyone here for joining us this evening, this afternoon, this morning. I hope you found it stimulating. I hope you can see the impact that the Hong Kong Foundation is already having, and I hope that you know, wets your whistle, to use that phrase, gives you some evidence as to the impact that the foundation is going to continue to have in the future. So my thanks to you all for joining us. And if I may, I'd like to pass now to Conrad Wang, our chair, to say a few closing words himself.
Well, I hope you all as excited and enjoyable last hour and a half. I really enjoy and inspired by all the four speakers and the talk. I mean, really fascinating. And I hope all the attendees who agree with me that your work are very, very important, and not only to the Hong Kong community, but I think globally as well. So I'm really looking forward to seeing the results as soon as possible. And I hope that the donor will think that you will get your money worth. And I've been advised that to advise you to have a continual contribution to our foundation. This is a bit of marketing, you have to excuse me for that. But we would like to plan a bit long term. I think we would like to have a continuous funding to the foundation, so we can actually plan ahead and fund more research in the future to come. And in case you have not donate yet, we welcome you too. And I'm sure can assure you personally, and I think the whole group, your money is in a very good hands. And we have spent every single dollar to the Birmingham University for the research. By the way, we are free of charge. I mean, we are doing this pro bono. So don't worry about it. We're not going to take any money away from the port, so to speak. Well, thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I think we will call it a day or evening, and looking forward to seeing you soon, maybe in person, hopefully, or not, Zoom again. So take care. Bye-bye.